This is Jamie Dyer welcoming you to another edition of the Quo-Cast. And if you'd like to be a guest on a future edition of the podcast, then you can. Just email quocast@outlook.com. That's quocast@outlook.com. Tweet @the Quo-Cast on Twitter, or check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/the Quo-Cast. So before I get to the topic of today's podcast, let me do a little promo here for France's son Furs, who has an album out. It's his debut album. It's called Until I Figure It Out. It's out now and on all streaming platforms. And on the official Quo Facebook, it says here, after receiving support from BBC Music Introducing on various singles and his first BBC Radio 1 play with It Feels Right, Furs decided it was finally the right time to bring out a full-length project. And you can listen to the full album on Spotify. I will put the links and everything that you need to check out his music in the description of this podcast. I've been listening and I'm impressed. I really like it. So now on to the topic of this week's podcast. In Search of the Fourth Chord, released in September of 2007. I remember it well. I got it on the day of release. It was the first album which I got to do that with. This album is the first album to have Rhino's lead vocal on an original Status Quo song. If you remember, he was on riffs doing Centerfold. If you want to hear more about Bad News, you can check out the interview that I did with Rhino at the latter part of last year. That's available on YouTube and also on the podcast feed. I'm part of that set that remember the message board changing on the official Quo site, which was very exciting with the new logo and everything. And Bad News being, to talk about it, being really popular within the Quo fandom, simply because it was seen as kind of a return to more rockier pastures, I suppose. And it even topped the HMV chart because people were downloading it, because this is the era where people suddenly realized, this is before streaming was counted in the charts, which kind of messed up this theory. But it was in the era when digital songs, so songs downloaded from iTunes and other places, could count towards the chart. Can't remember exactly who was behind it, but a lot of fans started downloading Bad News in an attempt to get it in the chart. And I remember that on the message board there was a little bit of a thing that when the chart was read out on Radio 1, someone actually texted in to ask if Status Quo were in there, had been yet, and they were like, no, it hasn't. And unfortunately, as far as I know, it didn't chart in the top 40, but it did end up at the top of HMV chart and possibly others as well. So Pip Williams returned for the first time since 1990 something's Don't Stop album. And the album had a different sound to it, to The Party Ain't Over Yet, produced by Mike Paxman. It was interesting, actually. I remember playing it for the first time and hearing the voice at the beginning. Now let's listen to the music and try to identify the chord. And going into beginning of the end and realizing it was a slightly different mix to the one that had been sent to radio stations for airplay and such, and the one that was in the video. But I liked it. I really like beginning of the end. It sounds great live. It's always good to hear those latter day Quo songs live, even the ones from Heavy Traffic that have been played for the past 20 years or so. Now you've got obviously the underlying theme there, the fact that they're joking in the title of In Search of the Fourth Chord, kind of playing on that free chord thing that they have not been doing for the past 50 years. There are more than 3 chords in many of their songs, sometimes 5, 6, 7, depending. The other thing to note here is the cover, which I know it's not one of their finest. It's quite cheap, I guess, in that it's playing on In Search of the Fourth Chord, Indiana Jones. It was probably something that was suggested. I think it's in the same school of thought as Under the Influence, right? Or Thirsty Work. Let's be very obvious about this. I think even the band have said in the past the cover, is not one of their best. But it looks good on a shelf. It looks pretty good when you get it out. It looks good. There was a vinyl version that came out. From what I've seen from pictures, it looked pretty good on a vinyl thing. Nice and colorful, nicely printed, etc., etc. So there we are. It's also said, I've got a document here in front of me. It says it's also a reference to the album, the title, In Search of the Lost Chord by British rock band The Moody Blues, who, of course, Pip Williams has produced in the past. So what about, apart from Beginning of the End, which was the lead single from this album, and had a video on the London Eye as well, which I was really impressed with. This is the era where I really got into Quo. Like the newer stuff, as opposed to just kind of listening to the back catalogue, excited about this new kind of rockin', we're on a bit of a concept-y type thing, with In Search of the Fourth Chord and songs like Pennsylvania Blues Tonight that kind of play on that. So we've got songs on here like All Right, which is that fast forward, Rick Parfitt, Wayne Morris number, the aforementioned Pennsylvania Blues Tonight, which was performed on This Morning, I want to say, which was very bizarre, but just playing into the fourth chord thing. And while I think about it, I think they appeared on the One Show as well, and Rick Parfitt did kind of a shuffly type thing, if you remember. It's on YouTube and it's hilarious. And what always makes me laugh is that sometimes Rick seemed very unsure about chords on certain things when he wasn't doing the shuffly thing. So he's doing this shuffly thing, and then did, and he does this chord, and he seems really unsure. So I think that's the one, and it's just funny. That he's a lot more knowledgeable about it than he's kind of letting on there. But it's literally just for the show. You and I know that he was extremely good at those kind of extra bits and pieces. I do recommend as well checking out Rick Parfitt's rhythm method, which is available. There's lots of little bonus things in there to get your teeth into, and especially good if you're learning to play Quo on guitar. So let's go on with the album here. I personally really like I Don't Want to Hurt You Anymore. I'm a huge fan of that song. It's a Rossi Young composition. Of course it is. I love the intro on that. They've kind of got a strange panning thing going on, which I think is really clever. It sounds very typical Quo, and the solo perhaps could be seen as a little bit lazy, but sometimes I like that, reminds me of some other songs that they've done, although the names of which are not coming to mind at the moment. Electric Arena, another Rossi Young composition, played on his solo tour only a few years later. I think he really likes it, and it's got a really nice, funnily enough, it's got a really nice solo on it. Not one of my favorites personally, but we go on to track 6. We've got Gravy Train, written by Rhino. Gravy Train, what a track. I have heard a demo of Gravy Train with Rhino singing. I'm not quite sure why he wasn't allowed or chose not to sing Gravy Train on the album because I think it really suits his voice. It's just a great song, isn't it? I mean, Rick does it justice on the album. I love the production of it. I think it's certainly for me one of the strongest on there. So we go on to the Andy Bowen written Figure of Eight, which again sounds quite simple, but it's kind of got Andy's eccentricity in there, which I really like. It's sung by Francis, and I find the little bit in the middle, the little chorusy bit, a figure of eight, really catchy. I like that. What do you think? Do you like that song? It's a little bit on the un-Quo side, and it's kind of got other bits going on in there, but I really like it. So you're the one for me. Matt Letley wrote it. I'd love to interview Matt, actually, because his drumming on these albums is just exceptional. Right? Brilliant. Great live as well, because I saw them live at this point. Man, they were tight. That was great. Really like You're the One for Me, especially the little lead bit at the beginning. There's little bits in there, kind of reminds me of Softer Ride. It's kind of the ding, 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 ding. That sort of reminds me of that. And I think that's what you find with this album. There's kind of little bits of old in there that isn't like ripping off themselves. It's more like just like tiny references that tell you this is Status Quo. Then you've got My Little Heartbreaker, which is kind of a mid-tempo country thing written by Rossi and Young, also performed on Rossi's solo tour. Then you've got Hold Me, which, as I say, kind of reminds you, it's that darker side, isn't it, of Status Quo. Then Saddling Up, which has one of my favourite lyrics on the album. Trailer trash, a waste of space girl, shouldn't have called me Cactus Face well. It's something like that, isn't it? It's like a 17-year-old me thought Cactus Face was hilarious for some reason. We've already talked about Bad News, and then we go on to Tongue Tied, which has got to be one of the most beautiful songs that Quo have ever recorded. It's a Rossi and Young thing again, and I want to say that the vocals were recorded on a tour bus or something. I want to say it was at the end of the day, and France's vocals were kind of a little bit on the maybe like tired side, but that really adds to it. That adds to the emotion of the song, and it gets me every time. It's just an amazing thing, and again shows that Quo is more than just free chords and rockin' and stuff. There's a really nice kind of story going on there, which I've always appreciated. So we've got In Search of the Fourth Chord. I've told you what my thoughts of it are. What are your thoughts? You can let me know in the comments on social media and via emailing Quo-Cast@outlook.com. I did ask in advance for people's opinions of this album, and I've got a few. Hopefully, as we do more of these, I will get more replies. What did fans of the band have to say about In Search of the Fourth Chord? So the first one is from Dan. He says, I'm still undecided about it. It just left, I assume he means felt, like the band pulling in different directions. That started on the Party album, then was totally obvious on Quid Pro Quo. It was, however, a very strong Rhino album. His contributions really shone through. Beginning of the End was an obvious and good choice of single, but the clipping of the tambourine in and out of the mix on the outro has always annoyed me for some reason. Was the mix rushed, I wonder? I was dubious at first, he continues, on hearing Pip Williams was back at the helm after how polished Don't Stop was, but overall, I think he got some great sounds out of them, and I think his occasional guitar flourishes added something. I Ain't Wasting My Time is the equivalent of Lonely not being on In the Army Now, criminal for it not to be on the full album. Wasn't really keen on the less rocking version of One by One, as the demo's backing track built up into an epic track. I'm always a bit harsh in scoring stuff. They have a lot to live up to, but I'd give it 6 out of 10. That was Dan. Thanks for contributing. And there's a couple of others here. Christopher says, I enjoyed it, but not their best by any stretch, but to me, enjoyable. Andrew follows on. Brilliant start, strong end, dips in the middle. I would be inclined to agree with you there, Andrew. I think what you mean there is obviously the beginning of the end and tracks like Electric Arena and Gravy Train, and then perhaps what people are a little bit thing about are like My Little Heartbreaker, because it's kind of more on the country end, then Hold Me and Saddling Up, and then obviously Bad News and Tongue Tied. And on some editions, I Ain't Wasting My Time. On other editions, One by One. But if you're looking to buy this album now, I believe both of those songs are now included. So that was the In Search of the Fourth Chord album. Whatever your opinion, let me know in the comments on social media, and I will see you again for another Quo-Cast.